Stage. I'm John from Rezzed. I'm just here to do the introduction. So our next session is all about the dark arts of level design and specifically raging against corridors in level design. And this will be given by our resident expert, which is Mark Drew from C&B Studio. Please welcome Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. The proper name for this talk was actually Tips on Level Design, but we'll get to that in a second. I'll be talking about tips about level design. I run a company called Command Studio, which is a game development studio. You've heard many of other people around here do the same thing. So we've been looking at level design quite a lot. And really the reason I've gathered all of you here was to have a bit of a rant about corridors. That's the real reason we're here, nothing to do with level design. Back in the 70s, there was a small indie movie that came out, made by a second-time director, about a princess in distress. Does anyone recognize this corridor? Right, it really annoyed me since I was a kid that I watched this. It's not very health and safety conscious, is it? There's a whole bunch of things that you can trip up over it. And, you know, there's so many places to hide. This was meant to be a prison cell. If anyone's seen any prison corridors in real life, or in the dark, in fact. You know, there's nowhere to hide in prison cells. Now, with that image in your mind, there's another part about that corridor that really annoyed me. So there is 2 stormtroopers and a Wookiee. The second interesting thing about a Wookiee, apart from its hairiness, it tends to be its height. It's about 7 feet tall. It wouldn't have fit in that. Right, so it's a very bad prison. It's a prison for short people that are very narrow, right? And obviously, you know, you can't have 2 guards. That sowed the seeds of my annoyance about level design, and that was all the way back in the 70s. I'm just going to wait for the next screen to appear. Please stand by. Just plug it into the other USB if you can. It looks like it might start working. Oh, thank you. Yes. And also, look, there's a big hole there. Who puts a nice escape route into something else? So the seeds started going in my head about it. And then only a few years later, maybe 35 years later, they did this. So The Force Awakens, they did this bridge. Now, can you understand why I'm going to start getting angry in a minute? Vast chasm, the handrails over here. And they stop. I mean, it's like, whatever you're doing to cross that bridge, health and safety, people. And by the way, the Empire has got a fetish. It's got a fetish for corridors, right? It's a corridor fetish. I mean, look at this thing. Corridor, 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 corridor. And the eagle-eyed amongst you might know, but say, but Mark, what's that? That's an atrium, which is just another name for a big corridor, all right? And they keep on doing it. And it's a sci-fi trope. Even in another universe, in the Alien universe, this is Alien Covenant. Okay, so it's the ideas of truckers in space, big corridors. Where are all these corridors coming from? And the game Doom, what was it, Doom 3? All I remember is corridors. Okay, so they were a little bit more complex. They had ray tracing and stuff like that. Okay, Doom 2016 was much better. So, okay, I'm not going to get into that one. We went back to its original roots, but still, corridors. And even in our own games, I start out by designing corridors because they look cool, right? But, I'm annoyed at myself. So what do? I go hey, let's do the first, Google search, level design. What's the first thing that I see? This, corridor, corridor, corridor. I mean, you must have a lot of money to build all these corridors with no rooms that they go into, right? Because corridors are like wasted space, right? Land and materials must be really cheap in this place for you to start building all these damn corridors, right? And even in a game that's really close to my heart, Creative Assembly's Alien Isolation. Have you guys heard of it? Indie title. Sorry, this is a picture I stole from your article, by the way, Tommy. Okay. So I'm getting appropriation for it. I'm trying to put credits, but it's Tommy who's sitting there. But if you look at the maps of Alien Isolation, which is set in a spaceship called Sevastopol Station, right? So thing about getting materials from the ground to space, it's expensive, even in sci-fi stuff. So if you got your architect to design this nice little area for you, and you design 2 rooms, or well, in this case, 4 rooms, and you went, yep, I want to get from, let's say, the room with a key card to the room with a lever. Well, no, I'm going to design it as the architect. You go through here, you go through this corridor, all the way down this corridor, down this corridor, down this corridor, up to here and over here and through there. I'd fire that architect. Really, I'd fire him. And, corridors are getting everywhere. I saw a trailer the other day. It was for this small other indie title called, it's a preview trailer, apparently, for something called Silent Hills. What is it? It's 2 corridors that don't even look like it's a sensible house. I mean, apart from the ghosts and stuff like that, the rest of it was just nonsensical. I mean, it's literally just a corridor. And don't even get me started on Super Bomberman, because that's just creating bloody corridors. So you can understand why my anger has been rising over the last few years, right? So I nearly rage quit this level design business, and I started trying to find out how I can fix this. So how do we do this? One of the ways that we can do this is go beyond the walls, go beyond these simple designs, right? So let's look at simple level design. So you're making a game, you got your player that starts from A, you want them to go to B. So what do? You create a room at A, a room at B, join them with a corridor. What's wrong with that? Well, the corridors aren't things by themselves generally in architecture. They're the outsides of the things that you want to be in, right? So, for example, that would be, this corridor would actually be the outside of these 2 other rooms that would exist there, right? You don't just go around building corridors in architecture for funsies, right? You actually have rooms. Okay, so if you're building a level design, A going to B, you can have 2 rooms that you imply 2 rooms in there with doors on them that you can't open for reasons, for that key that you have to go around Sevastopol to find, right? They're not usually black screens of doom. Please. Okay. But you get the idea. So basically, corridors do not exist by themselves. Even if you're looking around here, which is a really bad example because this is a kind of contrived space. If you look at your house, right? It's not like one corridor that if you knocked through would go to outside. And before, this has happened to me before, someone's mentioned to me, but how about tunnels, Mark, eh? How can you live with tunnels? Tunnels are a completely different construct, okay? That's for a completely different presentation about this. But in effect, they are a hole in the ground, yes? So they have a different construct. This is not something that you've built around that. And I'm trying to make up as much time as I can once we get. But so if corridors are bad, where can we get some more information from, right? We can look at other disciplines. Let's look at architecture, for example. In architecture, you try to design, beautiful buildings, but generally you try to use the least amount of material to get to the important parts of a building. Now, can you name me one building whose main attraction is its corridor? Yes?
Casino Productions?
Sorry?
Casino Productions.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. I mean, but you know what happened to that when they tried that trick, right? Of just creating one corridor? Yeah, I mean, I guess they owe everything to that corridor, huh? Yeah. No, I will not do a Fortnite dance. It's in my contract. Don't have a contract. So when we start looking at architecture, in architecture there's, I'm not asking you to become an architect. I'm not asking you to go and study for 7 years and then do an apprenticeship, et cetera, but you can shortcut that because there are architectural publishers. You notice I'm really winding this up, that you can actually go and get publications from. Now, one of these is a company called AT Publishers, and what they do, They publish a set of cards and books. They publish lots of different books on architecture, but they set a set of cards, and it's cards like this, so you can come and see them later, right? And each one is telling you the size of a building, the kind of structure, how many people it can have in it, and all of that. And it also gives you a great idea for different structures. Once we get it, you'll see a zoom up of it, but I'm showing you. Yes, I brought props to my presentation. How cool is that, huh? So the whole point about these are for architects to come up with ideas for building plans, and you can get an idea of how they're done. You guys really don't like my laptop, do you? Yeah, well, I have my notes in that, but okay. That should be interesting. We are beyond the mirror, guys. No safety net. Don't know how I'm going to click it from here. You know, I did a presentation in a university once, and I was getting all ready for it, and the battery was going low and low on my laptop. And I said, that's not a problem, because I'm about to go and present. And when you're presenting, you've obviously got your laptop plugged in, and there's not a problem to it. The electricity ran out, not just in the building, in the whole town. And then they said, why don't you go and present? And I went, okay. So I had to present with a laptop whose battery was going down. And you might wonder, how do I present? I had to have the laptop in front of me. The only problem, this wasn't a slide deck. This was actually live coding demo. So I had to live code with my hands backwards while someone was viewing it. Someone had the clever idea of like periscoping it. Yes, there we go. And are we good to go? Can I try and change the slide? By the way, that's not the, okay. I've got the slide over here. Oh, actually, that would be useful if that was plugged in. So yeah, so they periscoped me coding, and everybody else in the audience looked at it on their mobile phones. So this is not the toughest gig I've done. It's getting close. Yay! Awesome. So yeah, so as I was saying, it's A&T publishers publish a whole series of different books, including these cards. We have got housing plans. So it's like the interiors of housing. They also have the exteriors. Now, like for example, this amoeba plan. So I'm going to have to catch up, or you're going to give me 5 more minutes because of technical failures. Okay, great. You can see that there's a corridor in the middle. Hopefully you can see it all the way from the back. But that's not the purpose of the building. They've tried to use as least amount of space that they have available for them to make a corridor, right? To get people from the lift, I presume, and the stairs, to the important part, the things that they pay multi-million pounds for, wherever this is going to be built. They also do the same thing for urban blocks, but that's not kind of like what I'm talking about here. But if you're looking to do games and stuff like that, they've got like great different urban blocks, like for little buildings in cities and stuff, so you don't have to just do those rectangular things. So, for example, an amoeba building, right? It's like an interesting shape. Having said that, corridors do serve a purpose. So in Victorian buildings, especially of the rich, people had to build the building with a main corridor or hall going through the middle of it. Any guesses why that would be? Yeah. For paintings and stuff, that's a good one. Also the fact that I had servants. So if you're like in the room, actually enjoying the room and it's nicely heated, you want people that are looking after your house to be out of the way, right? As we went forward, and by the way, a lot of my notes are in there, and I can't remember the name of this style of house, they started putting the rooms together because it used less material, and you didn't have servants, so it's more for everyone, especially this house only costing $1,537, which is quite cheap. As an aside, can anyone tell me how many alleyways there are in New York? You're very close. There's only 4 alleyways. And in fact, there's one of them, and I can't remember because it's on my slide, is an alleyway that's down in Chinatown, which you've seen in every movie, in every NCCIS, etc. So, but the point is that this alleyway has been used again and again and again. Why? Because you've seen it in the other media. So people keep, like the film director goes, hey, we have to have a murder. Where's it going to take place? In New York. Where is it? We're in New York. In an alley in New York. Okay. So the guy goes out to find the location scout, and what do they find? The same alley that everybody else has used. But there's only actually alleyway. And there's only an alleyway, and an alleyway is what I'm going to take as a kind of city corridor, right? I know you could say roads are that, but is a leftover, right? We don't need alleyways anymore. And by the way, can you imagine per foot how much money you could make for turning that alleyway into buildings or into flats and things like that? So, space is important. Space costs money, so corridors are a thing. That's the alleyway. You might recognize it from one way or from the other. Put some dustbins here and a dead body, and you'll recognize it. So let's talk about some couple of in-game examples, right? Because we're at a game place, right? And this idiot's been going on about architecture for the last 10 minutes. So Gone Home was a game developed by Steve Gaynor and Kate Craig and somebody else's name I've forgotten. And it's built, they worked on BioShock, Minerva's Den, and various other different games. So they were experienced game designers, but this was a kind of first game that they did by themselves. And you can kind of tell that because the game is built as they gain knowledge. So the entranceway was the first bit that they built. Upstairs was the last bit that they built. So as you go through have you all played Gone Home? No spoilers in this, don't worry. Or maybe, or will I? So here's the level of the house. And this is more of a realistic house, even though it's like a hub and spoke level design. So here's the hub, here's the different spokes, the east wing and the west wing and the top of that. And they have got corridors. They have got corridors. So there's 1, 2, 3, a couple more corridors. I wish that was automatic. And you can see what they look like. They're kind of boring, but these corridors go around the room. And you might say, well, what was the point? I mean, even they do it. But this was them beginning out on their level design kind of adventure. The later they got into it, this is the corridor from upstairs in that game. Now using, 45-degree angles. 90 has gone out of the window, right? But of course, the main one we want to talk about is corridors in space. They seem to be quite popular. If you go to ArtStation, there's quite a lot of corridors that people have. And then if you go to the Unreal Marketplace, if you use Unreal, lots of corridors. The reason there are lots of corridors, anyone do any web development here? They're the style sheet of your world. Just by doing a corridor, which is a rectangular thing, you don't have to think about the use of the space or anything like that. You can imbue that style with lots of things. Are they steam valves? Are they laser things? Is it dark and is it gritty or is it clean? Right? So a corridor is very good for a designer to say, this is the style of the world. Like, if you haven't told me what's in the world, I can create a corridor. So it's good for that purpose. I just don't like them as part of the level. If we really go into space, what's the nearest thing that we have is the ISS station, right? The International Space Station. You're going, Mark, gotcha, mate. Lots of bloody corridors, right? But they're not really corridors. You can see the actual different nodes that are stuck kind of together, right? Because they have to get these payloads up in the space shuttle up into space. So they have to be a certain size, and they have to be little tubes like this. But actually, each one of these is a verbalized structure. In other words, a thing that does something, right? They're not someone that you just pass through. Each one has got a purpose for you to do. I don't know what node 1 is. It's going to probably be like hydroponics. Node 2 is going to be life support. Obviously, that always breaks down, which sounds really bad. You should really take care of that kind of stuff in spaceships. I really like corridors as well. Like, if they're nicely styled, get this one by Steve Eden. If you do something different, do something that catches the eye. But hey, when you're talking about level design, there's something called the whiteboard test. The whiteboard test really sees how you're doing level design. If you take a multiplayer level, for example, you can start seeing the skill that you're at, or the skill that a level designer that you're bringing on board has. So let's go through the whiteboard test. So as a beginner, you do it. It's got a river, it's got some buildings, there is no structure to it, there is no good things about it. They've just cut and pasted bits from their favorite maps, but not understanding the relationship between them, right? But then you get onto an intermediate, and they start getting the idea of like box, corridor, another, room, corridor, room, hallway, room. It might have like the circular. You're getting the basic patterns, you're getting the basic understanding of it. But once you start getting to a bit of higher level, you start getting this. You start getting interesting angles. You have interesting relationships. This might be the same multiplayer map as the previous one, but you have now a much more interesting space, right? And then you get to the super advanced one, the expert, would be like, anyone played another indie game called Dishonored? Right? If you've gone through those levels in there, like the mansions and stuff like that, you start seeing really expert level design coming through there, right? It's not just like a box with a hallway to another room. You have got relationship between the different spaces. And you want to give a player like a clue of where they're going and what they should do as a level designer. So let's have a look at some ways that we can do that. So this is from a level designer day talk at GDC, from the GDC Vault. You can get this on YouTube. I have screenshotted it. I am admitting that. It's down there if you want to see it. So from a first-person perspective, what is this? Is this just an indent? It's an L-shaped corridor, right? So this is easy to design. This is how you'd probably design it. But this is how the player experiences it. This is a bad thing, okay? It's like you're not really telling the player where to go. And this is from 30 Flights of Loving. This is a corridor, right? It could be like, it's in an airport, by the way. You can tell by the airport signage. But you wouldn't really be able to tell it's T-junction, right? Just because of the 90-degree-ness of it, right? So you have to start giving players a clue of what to expect. And in this, right, so one of the things where you're doing is like, this corridor just goes down to the bottom, right? When you're designing your levels, one good trick is to play them forwards and play them back. So instead of starting where you start at the player A, if you go back, it might slide right at the beginning. Start at B, try to make your way to A, and try and you'll start seeing your level as a player would see it for the first time. So for example, in this, you've actually obscured another pathway that they could go through. This is a good trick, right? So if I'm running this way, I would never see the pathway to the left. If I play my level backwards, I could see that there's a pathway there. Now, you might intend that to happen, or you might not intend that to happen, and these examples are very blocky and very drawn out, just so that I can make an example, right? And in 30 Flights of Loving, here's a nice corridor that you can actually see, gives you a whole bunch of stuff. You've got a change in elevation, so that guides the player, because down generally guides the player to go down. It's much easier than going up. You've got this 45-degree angle, and you've got another thing, a very tiny little thing that is actually telling you something very important. There's a tiny door there. Well, it's actually the corner of a door. Therefore, your brain works out that there must be a rest of the door. So you go down there and right. I know I'm over-egging a point, but there you go. You get a nice, knowledge that that's a corridor. You read it very quickly as a corridor that goes down and right. Simples. So for example, in a bigger shot, I tried to make it quite small. From here, it's really big. So in this, you can't really read very quickly in a shoot 'em up, whether that's a right turn corridor or whatever it is. Especially you guys at the back. Can you really tell? Right. If I put a window there, does that help? If I offset the window, does that help? A little bit better, because obviously the window is going somewhere, right? Unless it just finishes just there. But, most people don't offset a window like that. There's a great book by Alex Galzin from the pre-production, from worldofleveldesign.com. I've just butchered his name, and I'm sorry on video. I'm really sorry if I butchered your name. Who wrote a book called Pre-Production Blueprint, which gives you loads of tips. You don't have to read this. You don't have to make notes on this. Trust me. This is just from their website. but that's what the books look like. Loads and loads of tips on the thing that you should do before you start getting in front of Unreal or in front of Unity or Maya or whatever you use to design your levels, to gather references, to feel the player flow, to get lots of different ideas on how to build the world for that level, for that player to inhabit, and what makes it real. I can't remember how much it costs. It's not very much. You can download in PDF or get the actual book to throw out your colleagues. Anyway, if you're going to take anything from this presentation, is if you have a whole way, just put a door on it. And that's it. And that's me. Thank you. Please tweet that. If you have any questions, you can start now. But before you ask me any questions, we're actually doing a Level Design Mysteries panel on Saturday. It's going to be at the Fringe Theatre, which is that way. Yes. Down that way. It's got Rob McLaughlin from the Chinese Room, Claire Morley, Steve Lee, and Jonathan Wilson, who are geniuses. And I talked about Dissonance and Alien Isolation and a whole bunch of games. And these people have worked on them. BioShock Infinite, for example, Steve Lee worked on it. So it's going to be a great one. So if you're on Saturday, come and check that out. And if you have any questions, I'm going to stand here and answer them. But thank you for putting up with our dangerous...
Yes, thank you. Thanks to all of you for that. Yes, any questions for Mark? Anyone? Oh,
gentlemen,
okay.
I think...
So you say that from a world-building perspective, corridors are kind of problematic because they're not really logical or make sense within the setting of the game. But in terms of gameplay, do you think that corridors also serve for poor level designs in terms of gameplay and sort of?
It depends on your gameplay, right? So if you have got a very drive-forward gameplay, such as Doom, for example, Doom 2016, someone correct me, right? That was a very forward-driven design that corridors work well because you got your challenge, the thing that you got to break to get through it, right? But even in that, there's very few corridors that I remember. There are some right at the beginning, but then it always opens up a little bit. So it is a useful tool, but don't do everything like it. Like, for example, Mass Effect, at the beginning of Mass Effect, if I remember, you start up on a ship, and then there's like whole bunch of corridors that you got to go down for no apparent reason. I'm going like, you made this whole ship and it's just corridors, right? And I have to go down these massive corridors to get to another part. Why didn't you put that part over here, you know? Anyway, the gentleman here. We'll just get the microphone. Oh, sorry, we'll bring the microphone forward to you in a sec.
What's your favorite corridor-based game?
My favorite corridor-based game? Well, none. I mean, that's the whole point of this. It's like I've just gone on for like half an hour telling you how much I hate them. So no, I can't think of anything right, not on the spot right now. There's a, yeah, sure.
When you're starting like a level design from scratch, would you normally start from this is the story version of what this space is, or this is the gameplay version of what this space is?
Well, it depends on the game. I mean, if I've been working on both. One is like a game that's narrative, and the space has to serve the narrative. If you've got a gameplay-based game, so that you have to shooty at the thingy, you know, you say which is the most satisfying way to shooty at the thingy, right? So if a corridor is it, yeah, but don't dress it up just as a corridor, because even as I'm running down there shooting at the thing, I'm gonna be going, this feels weird, you know? So it just depends on what kind of game you're making. So those are two different things. The gentleman's been waiting for a long time.
Right. Do you find that with your way of design, people are less inclined to get lost playing the game?
Well, no, I think if you have, I kind of see what you're saying. Like if you have like two rooms with one corridor.
Don't make sense to me, and I think it's because they're just loads of corridors.
Right.
Just lead in random places.
But if you did like different colors of them, I'm trying to think of a game recently that you had very similar corridors, but just different colors or different feels. So if you have one corridor that's really dirty, if you're running and gunning, that's the way I think about it. If I'm running down a game where I'm not paying attention to the surrounding, and I go, right, really dirty room, really clean room, okay, those can be very similar corridors, but just with decals in one of them and not in the other, and you'll register it very quickly. So it depends.
How much do you think this applies to, for example, 2D level design? Because obviously you can't do the window example that that you showed in 2D. But do you think there are any like specific examples how you can, sort of get rid of annoying corridors in 2D games? I guess.
Not the guy to ask about 2D games. Never made any, so I'm sorry, I don't know. And it depends. We can have a chat about it later, but I don't really know. What kind of 2D games are you thinking about?
Well, I remember there was a game here in Rezzed where, for example, they just had some frustrating sort of blocked off halfway, blocked off corridors, and like sort of thinking of that, like how can you sort of improve that, make it better for the player?
Right. Don't block them off, or tell them that there's a dead end ahead. However you signal that. Yes, sir.
Thanks. I had two questions. One quick one. Regarding corridors, would you say that your qualm is with literal corridors, like the pictures that you've shown so far, or what about when it's the illusion of a kind of a corridor, like if you use flames to guide the player?
A good example is going to be forests, right? So in games like The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, you start at the beginning and go down a corridor. Essentially, there's trees on either side. You can't move out of it. I don't have an issue with that because I'm in the woods. I have an issue that I can't get into the woods. Why can't I get into the woods? It's like, oh, because it's a steep bank. Okay, right. So then I'm fine with that. But when it's like, here's trees that are wide enough for me to just saunter through, but there's the invisible blocking volume, that bugs me. And that's what you should be taking out of this. Make it naturalistic. Make it logical.
My other question was advice regarding like alternatives to corridors. I think you kind of covered that already. But
yeah, with alternatives, one is look at your level design. Start using 45 degrees, man. Just off the bat. Go for 33 at one point and go nuts. Any other questions? Or how are we for time?
What do you think about games that have both corridors but also open worldness to them as well? So like the Half-Life games, in the facilities you're going through corridors, but then all of a sudden you're outside, out in the open.
I think the point is not so much that the corridors, open world games, great. The corridors are inside. It's like, well, you took the whole dedication to make this whole world out here, but your buildings are misusing materials. It depends. Just make it believable for me. And I've tried to show you some tips of making it readable, make it believable. Corridors seem to be like a cheap way when you're designing top down, because you can make one thing, goes to another, that corridor goes out to the outside world. It's like, well, where are we? What's selling it? Like Borderlands, I don't remember that many corridors, even though they probably have tons of them, and you can prove me wrong, and people on the internet will prove me wrong. But it all feels like this is a building with a door that you go into a big area, and then you go in and out, rather than here's a big corridor for you to walk down. Make it believable in the environment that game is.
Got time for one more question if anyone has one.
They're making you run from left to right, aren't they?
What's your opinion on like natural corridors? So not in a building, but maybe like you've got hills on either side.
As I said, is if it reads to your mind or to your player's eye as something that's true, like okay. I think man-made ones are the ones that bug me because they were made by man, right? It's not the hand of God carving out a glacier, or river. Rivers make these natural things that are like corridors in effect, but so that's a river is dumb. It doesn't have architectural knowledge. It doesn't have access to pre-production blueprint, right? But as a level designer and you're doing a man-made object that's just corridors, it's like when you walk down corridors and start going, yes, there's a corridor here because they wanted to build a corridor. You're never going to have that, but I do that in games, and that's what's bugging me about it. But I hope you don't take away that it's just the corridors. It's about level design that I was trying to go away.
Cool. So I probably don't have time for any more questions. I'm sorry.
You can come up afterwards.
Yes, you can come afterwards. And as Mark says, there is the level design session at 2 o'clock, was it, on Saturday?
Yep.
And in the Fringe Theatre with, and Steve Lee has also been a speaker here before. He's really good. But for now, please give a fun round of applause for Mark Drew from Client Studios.
Thank you.